Now we all consume pop culture here, okay? We've been around the block, we know what cinematic universes are, we're all fans of the viewer skew-inverse. We were there when Don Knotts was on Scooby-Doo.
Now what did you see? Don Knotts!
When Dan Aykroyd was in that one scene in Casper. We've seen the untold horror of Timmy Turner animated in 3D.
And that overbite could crack open a sea turtle.
Those are just the big ones though. There's also a whole bunch of other ones, some you might not have even heard of. But point is, there's a whole lot of these things out there. Some more ambitious than others, some that are really more like continuing soft reboots, and some that really don't exist beyond just some cute Easter egg references. But what pretty much all of these serious attempts at crafting a cohesive, narratively consistent, money-making cinematic universe have in common is that they pretty much all don't work. The Dark Universe, the DCEU, Ghost Corps, fucking Hasbro toys, Pacific Rim, Fantastic Four again, the Sony Spider-Man universe, the Sony Spider-Man universe without Spider-Man. Now, granted, a few of these are still drawing breath, unfortunately, but in the last 10 years alone, we've seen so many of these projects rise and fall in the span of a couple years, sometimes even after one release. There's really only one example you can point to of a cinematic universe that's been able to sustain any kind of consistent major success over a long period of time, and even that one's not doing so hot these days. And then somewhere in the middle of like record-breaking success and complete and total embarrassment, you have something like the MonsterVerse, a cinematic universe that's kind of successful, I think. I mean, it's certainly not a disaster by any means, and it's managed to last for over a decade now and span 5 movies, all but one of which have done pretty well at the box office, but it really does kind of exist in its own weird class among the many cinematic universe projects. For one, because before the release of Godzilla vs. Kong, right smack dab in the middle of the pandemic, most non-pop culture sickos probably didn't even know that the previous 2 Godzilla movies and the King Kong reboot in 2017 were even in the same universe. Like, there is likely a large sect of the population whose introduction into the MonsterVerse as a concept was a clip of a giant monkey punching a giant lizard in the face on top of an aircraft carrier. And boy oh boy, what a fucking way to figure out these guys were in the same universe. It's also a universe that didn't really have any great ambitions to begin with, unlike say, I don't know, just picking one randomly. The DCEU, which cranked the meter all the way up to 11 from the get-go, and then immediately jumped the shark the very next movie. The first installment in the MonsterVerse, Godzilla 2014, was envisioned as nothing more than what it appeared to be, just a second Hollywood attempt at adapting Godzilla for an American audience. And then it just kinda happened to end up doing pretty well, and then they were like, hey, what if we threw a monkey in there? That might work. It's some pretty humble origins for a franchise that is what it is now, which is rather unique for this current era of cinematic universe mania. It is far more successful than most other attempts at sustaining something like this, and it doesn't even seem like they're even trying that hard. Not to say there's not effort and real work being done on these movies, but like, come on, you know what I mean.
Is that a mini Kong?
It's just kind of there, hanging out in the corner of the party, doing its own thing, not getting too ambitious, not embarrassing itself, just being good old Mr. Reliable. Where other companies like Disney bank their entire year and sometimes upwards of $300 million on each project, the MonsterVerse films generally cost around like $150, which for a modern day blockbuster is a bargain. And aside from King of the Monsters, which had the terrible misfortune of coming out right in between Endgame and Spider-Man Far From Home, they all made pretty good money. Even Godzilla vs. Kong, which came out in the height of the pandemic in March and on the same day streaming, still pulled in nearly $500 million, a milestone this most recent entry will have likely crossed by the time this video comes out, which in turn is most likely going to lead to yet another entry into this franchise, a thing that I imagine even the studio executives didn't even think would happen way back when they planned all this out. So in that way, I do kind of admire it among the current hellish Hollywood landscape. It's just out there, chugging along, not getting people all worked up on the internet, not stirring up any controversy, just taking a few action figures and making them kiss. Some casual, fun, lowbrow entertainment. Not a whole lot more to it. But, thing is though, that may be what the franchise is now, but it didn't start out that way. It had to spend a few movies growing into its fully realized dumb self, and the strange thing is, I think it's actually for the best. Unlike some franchises that I would criticize for starting relatively on rails and serious and then devolving into complete nonsense over time, the devolution of the MonsterVerse from Godzilla 2014 to Lizard x Monkey 2 is less of a bug and more of a feature if you ask me. Like how Oblivion is like objectively a more fun game because of how unintentionally silly and rough around the edges it is.
Lady Umbernox has hired a new captain. Lady Umbernox has hired a new captain of the guard.
But that's not to say that the first few movies in the MonsterVerse didn't have some good things going on. In fact, I would probably still say that Godzilla 2014 is the best one of the 5, even if I think it's good that the movies moved away from what that one was going for. Which doesn't seem to make a lot of sense because it doesn't. But just bear with me here as we go through the serious, the silly, and the downright just stupid evolution of the MonsterVerse. So, like I said, the MonsterVerse didn't start out as the MonsterVerse. It wasn't trying to get its foot in the big cinematic universe door or like start this giant franchise. No. All it was trying to do was make an American Godzilla movie that didn't suck. And after the embarrassing attempt back in 1998, the bar was pretty low.
The network is on an intranet. It's a direct feed into our computer system.
Much like how Batman had devolved into a joke by the end of the 20th century, at least as far as the films go, Godzilla both in the States and in Japan had simply just run out of steam. So, when it came time for the reboot, much like every other reboot at the time, it was caught in the Christopher Nolan wave, where the play was to make it dark and gritty and just take it a lot more seriously than it had in the past. And serious really is the perfect word to describe this movie, and what sets it so far apart from a movie like Godzilla vs. Kong.
My wife died here. Something killed my wife.
It's slow, it is plotting, it is thematic, and it is deadly fucking serious. To the point where even though I saw this in theaters way back when, and at least once or twice in the years after, when I recently went back and rewatched this in preparation for this video, I was still shocked how serious this movie takes itself, and also how hard everybody is trying in it. Like Bryan Cranston, who is famously underused in this, has a few scenes where he is actually trying and giving it his all and delivering borderline Oscar-worthy monologues. And not that we should all be flabbergasted when a professional actor is, you know, being a professional actor and giving it his best effort, but you really don't see it all that often in major American blockbusters, and certainly not in blockbusters whose main character is a CGI monster. Like Bryan Cranston is barely in this, and yet he turns in a performance that's so authentic that it's genuinely confusing sometimes. Like, do you know what movie you're in, man?
This is what caused everything in the first place. Don't you see that? And it is going to send us back to the Stone Age.
But thing is though, that vibe and that seriousness he's tapping into is what the movie is going for. It would be sorely out of place in the other MonsterVerse movies, but here, that's just the whole vibe. It's not really an action film, it's not funny or silly or quippy, it's not particularly star-studded outside of Cranston. Even Godzilla himself is barely in it. If anything, it's kind of best described as like a horror disaster movie or like an alien invasion movie in the vein of War of the Worlds. It is an extremely unconventional modern day blockbuster that in hindsight was rather bold and really fucking ballsy for dropping itself on an American public that was at the time feasting on lighthearted fun movies like The Avengers. And I still clearly remember the amount of shit this movie got for it. I mean, I would know because I was one of the people who was let down by it. I wanted more Godzilla and more action and more Bryan Cranston, and I just wasn't really prepared for the tone it was going for. Granted, the movie really outdid itself when it came to the trailer, which to this day is still one of the best trailers ever made, so there was some serious hype around this, and again, I just don't think that American audiences at the time were primed to enjoy something this slow-paced and subdued, at least compared to the contemporary blockbusters. Keep in mind, in 2014, the highest grossing film globally was Transformers: Age of Extinction. Not exactly a movie known for its heavy themes and slow pacing. And even just a year prior to it, you had Pacific Rim, which delivered all the glorious kaiju fights you could ever ask for, and then some. Whereas in Godzilla, you don't really get to see Godzilla do much of anything until the final act, which is a level of restraint that, while I greatly admire now, and I think only enhances the impact of the action you do get, was certainly not something audiences were hoping to see when they bought their tickets. I actually find it really strange how much I'm going to bat for this movie because, again, I was one of the many people who were let down by it when it first came out, but as the years have gone on and I've gone back and given it more chances, it's really grown on me, especially now in the wake of Godzilla Minus One, a film that is far better than Godzilla 2014, to be clear, but one that adopts a similar serious tone and portrays Godzilla as this terrifying force of nature rather than a big dumb action figure, because that is what Godzilla really is about. It is the collective trauma of a nation of people terrorized by atomic power, made manifest in the form of a man in a lizard costume stomping on a tiny cardboard city. All that being said though, when you look at this film as what it is now, which is the start of the MonsterVerse, a lot of its shortcomings and the greater reaction to it clearly played a massive role in what the franchise eventually evolved into. For one, easily the biggest issue with this movie and the issue that has plagued much of this franchise is the lack of quality human characters.
You got family waiting for you?
I hope so.
You do have some bright spots here and there with Bryan Cranston and Ken Watanabe, but both of them are dramatically underused, and we unfortunately spend most of the film following the most generic, bland, uninteresting family plot you can have, where Aaron Taylor Johnson is military man and he wants to get back to wife and kid, and we have to painstakingly follow all three of them going through various scenes of trying not to get squished by monsters. It's just not very interesting.
I just want you to know that I love you.
And even aside from them, the greater human plot in this one really doesn't work at all. They devise all these various plans to deal with Godzilla and the other monsters, none of which work or have any impact on what happens in the movie at all, and it just ends up feeling like this colossal waste of time.
But if we rig a nuclear warhead with a shielded timer, put it on a boat and send it 20 miles out, the radiation lures the Mutos, and the Mutos lure Godzilla.
Later.
When you find the warhead, how long to disarm it?
It almost works with the Ken Watanabe character realizing that we can't do anything and we should just
Let them fight.
But then they just keep doing the boring human plans anyway, and yeah, it just doesn't work.
It's sealed shut. We need time to get this open.
We don't have time. Let's haul it out of here. We gotta get it on a boat.
And the sad thing is, despite how sloppy it all is, it still might be the most cohesive human element of any of these movies. It's a trend that unfortunately will continue to rear its head in dumber and dumber ways. Not always for the worst, mind you, but let's just say they don't spend a lot of time fleshing out the humans these days.
Is that a mini Kong?
It also has a slight case of what I'm going to call God of War 2018-itis. You see, in God of War 2018, Kratos and Boy are obviously fighting their way through the pantheon of the Norse gods, which is awesome, but they so clearly intentionally leave out all the heavy hitters like Thor and Odin because they want to save them for the next game. So a lot of the boss fights that you do get feel like it's Kratos, this like super god killer, beating up on the god JV squad. Like, oh no, not Magni and Modi, whatever am I going to do? And likewise, in Godzilla, the monsters that Godzilla is going toe-to-toe with in the end aren't Mothra, or Rodan, or King Ghidorah, or Monkey. It's, the Mutos. Gee, I wonder who's gonna win that one. And not that I expect them to like blow their wad in the first movie, but you know, I'm just saying you could perhaps have Godzilla fight something a tad bit more powerful or interesting, or at the very least just something visually more neat than the massive unidentified terrestrial organisms. But hey, what do I know? There's also something just so unintentionally hilarious about how through so much of this movie, both the Mutos and Godzilla will make landfall in a city seemingly out of nowhere, and not a one person sees them coming, and then they proceed to knock half of the town down, and then are somehow able to vanish without a trace with minimal to like zero witnesses, like they're goddamn Solid Snake or something. Godzilla has never been stealthier than he was in this movie. Overall though, it's one of the weirder films out there that have launched a cinematic universe, because unlike an Iron Man or a Man of Steel that for better or for worse set the tone for their respective franchises, Godzilla, if anything, did the opposite, and every subsequent movie felt like a reaction to everything audiences complained about with it, resulting in a franchise that has almost nothing in common with the film that started the whole thing off in the first place. And that dramatic shift from serious, thematic, subtle horror disaster movie to Saturday morning cartoon crossover began to take shape the very next film. So regardless of any issues audiences and critics may or may not have had with Godzilla 2014, the reality was it made a pretty nice chunk of money. And it was the mid-2010s, so the only logical next step was to turn the movie from just an average, garden variety Hollywood reboot to the start of a multi-movie franchise that can keep that stream of money flowing.
Is that a mini Kong?
And so the MonsterVerse, as we know it today, was set in motion. And the first step was to bring in the monkey, a task that is famously easier said than done, as the rights to the ape are scattered across various groups like RKO, Studio Canal, and the Merian C. Cooper estate, while primarily being held by Universal Pictures, and all of that despite the fact that the specific novelization of the screenplay of the first movie from 1933 has been in the public domain since 1973. Thereby making Universal's ownership of King Kong perhaps the single most useless rights to a character in all of Hollywood.
Is that a monkey?
I'll spare you the whole King Kong rights tangent, as that would take a whole video by itself, and no one cares, but to sum it up as it relates to the MonsterVerse, Legendary Entertainment, along with WB, did acquire the complicated rights to King Kong and can use him as long as they avoid various legal landmines and make references to the novelization specifically. And so we have Kong Skull Island, a movie that quite literally only exists for the sole purpose of making King Kong big enough to fight Godzilla. And considering that's all the movie really is, it's pretty good. In many ways, it's kind of the antithesis of Peter Jackson's King Kong, where instead of applying a sort of Titanic-esque level of self-importance and tragedy and drama and endless lingering shots of people on boats and not even getting to the island for like an hour, its focus is entirely on showing cool shit and monsters and action, and could not give less of a fuck about King Kong wanting to date a hot blonde lady for some reason. No, this Kong does not fuck, but the movie certainly does. In fact, the speed at which the movie fucking beelines it straight to Skull Island is so fast and so noticeable that it feels like a direct response to the 2005 movie. I mean, they waste absolutely no time setting up the plot or the characters. It's just scene, then bam, here we are on the island, and not a single second wasted. It's a pretty honest kind of filmmaking, which I do appreciate in a way, though admittedly it doesn't lead to the most fleshed out plot and characters.
Vietnam's not an island, dumbass.
what Key West is. And that's exactly where I need to be right now.
In fact, I would describe this movie as one of the most empty, substanceless blockbusters I've maybe ever seen. I mean, certainly in the past, decade or so. There are no themes, no arcs, no commentary on literally anything, just not a goddamn thing happening below the surface. It's like if you told ChatGPT to make a generic blockbuster. But again, I don't really have an issue with it because it's pretty upfront about it.
Now there's a man worth talking to.
Unlike Godzilla 2014 that tried to subvert monster movie tropes and use the film as an allegory for humans' hubris in thinking they can control nature, Kong Skull Island really just wants to have a scene where a giant monkey absolutely wrecks a bunch of helicopters and then sits down to eat a giant squid for lunch. That's pretty much it. Taking cues from the reaction to Godzilla, there's no boring family dynamic, and instead we have a classic group of adventurers and action heroes. A formula that should work and does in some areas, but utterly fails as it relates to our two leads. You got Tom Hiddleston playing Action Man, and the woman who lives rent-free in the minds of all internet incels, Brie Larson playing Lady with Camera. Now, in an average movie, these would be the two characters that we, the audience, would care most about since, they're the main characters, but I guess as a result of wanting to avoid all the complaints about how much Godzilla wastes time with the dull family dynamic, they pretty much just abandon any pretense that these aren't completely one-dimensional cartoon characters.
We're just scholars and scientists. We need someone with experience in case things go sideways.
The movie has one goal and one goal only: have cool monkey action. And to be fair, it does deliver on that promise, but it also means that the two leads get virtually zero characterization.
The right photo can help shape opinions.
And win you a Pulitzer.
Okay, Captain Conrad.
Tom Hiddleston is a tracker who gets hired by John Goodman to, And Brie Larson is a photographer who tags along for, not really sure why, actually. That's pretty much all you can say about either of them, and you know what they say, you can always tell it's a good character when the only thing you can say about them is their job.
Your job is finding lost men, right?
I think they're also supposed to develop some kind of relationship or something, and I guess they also don't want to kill Kong because they're nice, maybe?
Stop! The world is bigger than this.
I'd say they're miscast, but their characters are written so thin and given no personality that I don't think anyone could make them work. That being said though, Tom Hiddleston is really not meant to play an action hero that adopts poses like this. So all of that is of course a huge issue for scenes where action is not happening, but the movie does make up for it a bit with John C. Reilly, who plays a crazy old pilot that's been stranded on Skull Island since the end of World War II. He's just going off script and having a good time.
We have an old saying here, east is best, west is worst. That's why we say it. Southwest? We can talk about that, but...
Sam Jackson, likewise, also understands what movie he's in and goes all in on playing Mr. Meanie Head Army Man.
It's time to show Kong that man is king.
So, you do have some bright spots there, but again, the only thing the movie has even the slightest interest in is cool shit, and to its credit, there is plenty of that in here. There's this awesome scene in this bamboo forest where they fight this giant spider-like creature whose legs blend in with the bamboo, which is so fun and so neat. There's also a Cannibal Holocaust reference in there, which is unexpected, but cool. The initial fight with Kong and the helicopters is incredibly shot and sounds amazing. I didn't mention this in the Godzilla 2014 section, but both of these first two movies are some of the best looking and sounding blockbusters in the past decade. There's some really incredible looking stuff in both of them that definitely gets lost in the shuffle of the greater MonsterVerse commentary and the reality of what the movies are today, but it's worth mentioning the stamps both Gareth Edwards and Jordan Vogt-Roberts are able to put on these two films, especially a movie like Kong Skull Island, which again only exists as a stepping stone for a future film down the line. It is a lot better than it has any right being, and yet it's still a movie that is totally defined by its need to veer the tone of the MonsterVerse away from the seriousness of Godzilla. And as a result of its success, and more importantly, the follow-up film Godzilla King of the Monsters' failure, it basically killed any possibility of this franchise taking itself seriously ever again.
But I call them skull crawlers. Why? Because it sounds neat. Okay.
When you zoom out and look at the MonsterVerse in its totality, Kong Skull Island, not Godzilla 2014, was the true starting point for the franchise and the well that Legendary is constantly going back to when making future films. It's got everything the movies do now: the scrappy team of adventurers, the focus on immediate action, the harebrained plot details, the sarcastic, silly tone, the focus on Kong and not Godzilla as the primary attraction, and really the primary protagonist, the complete abandoning of any fleshed out human characters beyond basic functionality and comic relief. It's all laid out in this movie, and honestly, while it may be empty and kinda dumb, I think it was the right choice to make, which is not something you can say about everyday decisions made by Hollywood studios. But before we get to the final form of the MonsterVerse, there's still one little movie that effectively put the nail in the coffin on this franchise ever taking itself seriously ever again. So, Godzilla King of the Monsters is what I would describe as the nexus point for the MonsterVerse. Not only for its convenient placement as the middle movie of the 5, which is nice, but mainly for being this mess of everything both good and bad about every film in the franchise. Because unlike Kong Skull Island, which went all in on a lighter tone and didn't really bother trying to elevate the material like Godzilla 2014 did, this movie tried to have its cake and eat it too. It tried to have both the orgy of giant monster action and visual spectacle, and also maintain the serious tone and focus on human characters. Now, that's not like an impossible thing to pull off. You can for sure craft a crazy, cinematic, in-your-face monster movie that also takes itself seriously and is grounded in something human. It's not the easiest thing to do, but it can be done. Problem is though, if you go for that and it doesn't work, then the whole movie kind of comes crashing down, which unfortunately was the case for King of the Monsters. Now, I don't hate this movie like some people do. I think there is a lot to enjoy here, but there is also a whole lot not to enjoy. And because it spreads itself all over the place, no single tone or single great thing is really able to emerge. Like in Godzilla 2014, even if you wanted more action and less human bullshit, the movie's slow burn and eventual reveal of Godzilla in the third act does pay off really well because they held back for so long. The action you do get feels so much more earned because everything built up to it. And in Kong Skull Island, you might not get a whole lot out of the plot or the characters, but the movie doesn't waste your time with any of that and focuses mainly on delivering fun, creative action sequences. But in King of the Monsters, you get these small glimpses of great things here and there, but every single time those moments come, something else will come in right afterwards and drag it back down. Let's start with what this movie does great: the monsters. The one aspect that I think it does better than any other movie in the franchise, at least for the most part. Unsurprisingly, the director Michael Dougherty, who gave us the super underrated 2015 Christmas horror film Krampus, knew a thing or two about making a movie monster look and sound incredible, and boy do they. He was not only tasked with using Godzilla, obviously, but also Mothra and Rodan and fucking King Ghidorah all in one movie, and he's able to balance all of them perfectly. It never feels bloated or like there's too many monsters to keep track of. It's basically the all-star lineup of all of Godzilla's most popular foes and what fans wanted out of Godzilla 2014.
You got a catchy name for this one?
Local legends call it Rodan.
Like God of War is to Godzilla, God of War Ragnarok is to Godzilla King of the Monsters. The guy is finally done fighting the JV squad and he's moved on to the big fish, and it is amazing to see. The monsters visually are stunning, and you get this great sense of their power and presence and even like their personality without any dialogue, and almost solely through the visuals and sound you understand all their dynamics individually and with each other. There's this great shot of Godzilla swimming in the dark where as he lights up you see him, and from that scene alone you fully understand how he feels about his role in the movie. He's here to do his job and keep all the Titans in balance, but clearly has no love for the humans and will have no issue killing them if they get in his way. It's a shot that shows him equally beautiful and terrifying. It's just amazing.
Well, that was interesting.
You can tell from this sequence that Mothra is unique among the Titans, where she has no desire to dominate or destroy, which makes her and Godzilla's eventual cooperation seem totally plausible because they so clearly are both on the side of keeping things in balance. Rodan is just a typical one of these assholes who defends his territory and will bow down to an alpha if one is keen on dominating him. A strong titan, yes, but clearly one that follows the most basic animal patterns and instincts. Now, King Ghidorah is like the prime apex example of this, where each one of his heads has its own personality, and even without the backstory spiel of his rivalry with Godzilla, you can tell immediately that this guy and Godzilla cannot coexist and actively compete for dominance. Also, the way he travels in essentially a hurricane shows how much stronger he is than the average Titan. You see that shit in like his lightning powers and can easily buy that he is capable of fighting and defeating Godzilla, which is impressive because they struggle with that very thing in Godzilla vs. Kong. And the way all of them sound is unlike any of the other movies. Again, that Krampus influence shows up in a big way. They hit the monster designs out of the fucking park, and yet, despite how good they look and sound, you never really get any great fight scenes between them. There are plenty of fight sequences, but none of them hit like they should. Because of this movie's desire to maintain a serious, dramatic tone, they shot all the fight sequences in like torrential downpours, or in a snowstorm, or in the ocean where you can't see anything. Just like the fucking dewbacks in the special edition of A New Hope, there's always some goddamn thing clogging up the screen, and it's so annoying. Just get that shit out of here. It's like it's almost embarrassed to just have a simple wide shot of the monsters in broad daylight because that would be too silly or something. It all stems from the movie's obnoxious sense of self-importance, where despite having these absolutely glorious, amazingly designed monsters, they demand that at the same time, we care about Millie Bobby Brown and her boring-ass family. A family that is not only not capable of holding the audience's attention, but also actively takes away from the actual main attraction. It is the exact same Godzilla 2014 issue, except without the build-up or payoff with Godzilla. Here, they just tease you with what could be a movie where Godzilla is the protagonist like Kong is in the most recent ones, and then would just cut away to yet another boring human plotline. Yet again, underutilizing the talents of Ken Watanabe and also now Kyle Chandler, who is great in everything and could have worked a lot better in this if he wasn't tethered to this just boring ass family dynamic.
Madison, I just don't want to see you get hurt.
I know.
Especially with everything that's going on right now.
I know.
Like, if it was written where his whole family was killed in the first movie, and as a result, he's totally drunk and washed up, and then has to pull himself together to help prevent this thing from happening to anyone else. But instead, during the climax of the movie, where Godzilla and Ghidorah are eradicating every living cell in the Boston metropolitan area, Millie Bobby Brown is somehow able to survive, and we are supposed to be relieved when they find her, again, in a city in which untold thousands of people are being melted every second as Godzilla just walks around.
It's gonna be a bad day to be a Red Sox fan.
Now, this is an issue that you wouldn't really have to think about in a silly, dumb movie like Godzilla vs. Kong because it's basically a cartoon, but in a serious movie where you want the audience to, care about human life, you can't just breeze past that aspect. I mean, just look at what they do in Godzilla -1. That movie takes itself so seriously that the whole movie is about the catastrophic loss of life. The one scene where Godzilla actually uses his atomic breath is only there to show the horror of it. It's not cool or badass, it's haunting and chilling, and afterwards, it is dead quiet because the entire city is fucking dead. But in King of the Monsters, it's as if Millie was the only person left in the city, and when she's saved and Godzilla wins, we're all supposed to be like, yay, he saved the city. Also, turns out that the first movie was fucking stupid when it had the audacity to claim that we can't control nature. Apparently, we can make a single bomb that can kill Godzilla and also revive him from said bomb with a different bomb. Turns out these guys, fucking chumps, nobodies. Us, the humans, we are the true alphas, okay? Also, man, that oxygen bomb sure to come in handy in the future. The whole movie is just this mess of clashing tones, almost as if the two tones were fighting each other for dominance over the other. Is this going to be a franchise that we want people to take seriously, or is it a dumb cartoon where monkeys live in the hollow earth? It's the point where the MonsterVerse found itself at the crossroads for what Godzilla vs. Kong was going to be, and due to the film's poor reception and box office take, the days of this franchise taking itself seriously had come to an end, and the Saturday morning cartoon was all but set in stone. And you know what? Much as I do like movies that, take themselves seriously and don't feel like they're made ironically, I think it all worked out for the best because what followed is certainly something special. So now we find ourselves at the end of the evolution of the franchise, the final form. It had spent years in the awkward middle stage evolution where you weren't quite sure if it was cute or badass, is it a silly thing, is it a serious thing, but now it was a full fucking Charizard, baby, and it was ready to make that very clear. As clear as a monkey punching a lizard on top of an aircraft carrier. And, like I've been saying this whole time, it was all for the best because while I would still say that Godzilla 2014 and probably also Kong Skull Island are better than this movie, there is a real argument to be made that this is the best one of the franchise. Now, this argument does not include many references to quality writing or performances or directing, or really any of the usual things you would use to argue a movie is good, but what it does have that none of the rest do is a complete and total awareness of what it's doing and who it's for. Every single thing the movie is trying to do works, and the things that haven't worked in the past, like the human characters, are pretty much just ignored, almost as if they sat down in a room and just wrote a list of what has and has not worked in the past, and what audiences have and have not responded well to in the past, and then simply crafted a movie that features all of the strengths with none of the weaknesses. Now, it doesn't result in a particularly deep or ambitious film, and certainly something that you kind of have to turn your brain off to enjoy, enjoy, but there's no denying that it delivers on what it sets out to do. It's a movie where King Kong fights Godzilla, and that's all it's trying to be. And really, I can't imagine this movie being a different tone than what it is. It's a concept so inherently silly and goofy and unserious that to even attempt to take it seriously would in itself be a form of self-parody. It just has to be a cartoon. There's no other way. And credit to them, they fully embraced that reality. It is dumb as a pile of rocks. As dumb as when Fast and Furious drove a car into space. Except in this one, they aren't driving their car into space. No. They're driving their car into the hollow earth. A concept that is arguably even dumber than strapping a rocket to a car.
We're in outer space! Told you numbers don't lie.
Now, for basically the entire franchise, they've been planting seeds about the hollow earth, which, for the uninitiated, is the idea that the interior of the earth is actually made up of vast, gigantic caverns and tunnels. It's mainly brought up as a way of explaining how the Titans can remain hidden for so long and seemingly pop up out of nowhere. It's mentioned offhand in Kong Skull Island and then shown a bit in King of the Monsters when they go to Godzilla's underwater temple lair thing. But the hollow earth we see in that movie is far different from what we get in Godzilla vs. Kong. In that one, it's more or less just an underwater cavern that may as well just be in the ocean. Really not all that crazy. But in Godzilla vs. Kong, they crank the stupid meter all the way up and essentially portray it as a totally separate ecosystem full of lush, temperate, habitable biomes that feel like a full-on alien planet. Not only that, but the only way to get to it is to go like supersonic through a reverse gravitational portal that then spits you out on the other side.
Here, for the vomit.
What?
Now, the whole reason why the plot has the characters go down there is because rich bad guy Elon Musk, for some reason, thinks there's a power source in the hollow earth that he can use for a currently undisclosed reason. But problem is though, they aren't aware of any of the access points to the hollow earth. So their brilliant plan is to fucking cart King Kong from Skull Island to the middle of Antarctica with, I guess, the full cooperation of the US Navy under the assumption that when they just kind of let him go, he will naturally find his way back to an access point because it's in his DNA, like salmon always finding their way back to their birthplace or something. Do they elaborate on this? No, but it works. Meanwhile, elsewhere, Godzilla is apparently being a huge asshole and attacking various cities around the planet, and no one knows why, not even Kyle Chandler, until of course a humble podcaster begins to unravel a conspiracy about Elon Musk with the help of Millie Bobby Brown, who's back, and also that kid from Deadpool 2, which eventually leads the three of them to discover that the power source Elon Musk is after is required to power a giant robot Godzilla called Mechagodzilla, which, when powered, will be operated by a man Pacific Rim mind melding inside the skull of one of the heads of King Ghidorah, which I guess makes sense even though it's just a skull and not like a brain or anything. Also, apparently, one of these heads survived being melted and or eaten in the now wasteland that was once known as Boston, and not just survived, but like has been perfectly preserved. It's also got cool gamer lighting, got them nice RGB colors. But then when Elon Musk gets the power source, something goes wrong with the mind meld from Guy to Alien Hydra to Robot Godzilla, and I guess results in the soul of King Ghidorah and or the combination of King Ghidorah and some guy going into the body of Mechagodzilla, a la Megatron's soul going into the cube former in Transformers Age of Extinction, you know, the one that has the scene that justifies an implied sexual relationship of an adult man and a teenager. That teenager, played by the girl who played Katara in the M. Night Shyamalan Avatar The Last Airbender movie, and is also the real-life daughter of an Elon Musk-type billionaire, thereby making this tangent somewhat related. So now, whatever combination of souls is in Mechagodzilla is completely out of the control of Elon Musk. Oh no! Meanwhile, Godzilla, being of course drawn to Mechagodzilla for a reason that apparently does not need explained, arrives in Hong Kong and proceeds to blast a hole from the surface of the Earth all the way down to the Hollow Earth, which kind of makes the need for an existing entry point to the Hollow Earth kind of redundant if you can just blast your way down to it, but whatever. He blasts the hole all the way down to where Kong just found a really cool axe, and then Kong's like, man, fuck you, I'm gonna beat your ass now. And then he just climbs up as if the distance really isn't that far at all, which again kind of calls into question the supersonic anti-gravity stuff, but anyway, he climbs up and they fight, and it's cool and badass. Turns out, the monkey-sized axe he picked up can deflect Godzilla's atomic breath, which is radical, but of course Kong being a monkey and Godzilla being an atomic dino lizard inevitably ends with Godzilla as the victor. But then, now evil Mechagodzilla is on the loose and Godzilla is getting his ass kicked since he used all his energy on Kong, and now both Kong and Godzilla seem to be down for the count. Until Alexander Skarsgård gives Kong like a super defibrillator blast and he gets up and he's like, oh shit, I'm alive. And he's like, man, I don't want to help Godzilla. That guy's an asshole. But then a little girl is like, you know what, you should. And he's like, oh shit, you're right. So then of course they team up to fight Mechagodzilla. They of course win by using a combo move, radical. And then Godzilla gives Kong a look of, you know what, I don't like you, I never liked you, but I'll give you a pass just for today because you helped me kill an evil robot version of myself. But if you're still here tomorrow, oh, it's on. You're done. The end. Now tell me an 8-year-old didn't write that. It's basically a perfect screenplay.
I thought you said you were an actor.
I just said I took an HTML course at summer camp.
HTML?
You said summer camp.
Was it a 90s camp?
The movie abandons any pretense that it's even in the slightest bit serious and just goes all in on a story like this that's so dumb and so nonsensical that me simply describing it works as a joke for my dumb YouTube video.
You know, if this wasn't contributing to world destruction, this would be a great DJ booth.
In fact, it's so unserious that it's kind of immune from criticism, which is why I'm not really criticizing it all that much. And not to say you can't criticize it, but doing so would be taking the movie more seriously than the people who actually made it. I mean, it really is just the Jimmy Timmy Power Hour with a $200 million budget, and for the incredibly small vision it has, it works. I mean, say what you will about it, but you can't take away the fact that it's one of the only cinematic universes to actually make it to the Avengers team-up film stage and actually kind of stick the landing. Granted, landing a concept like that is about as difficult as landing a paper airplane, but hey, you know, it still counts. And despite its terrible luck with COVID, it did really well, and for a hot minute was in the pop culture discourse. People were talking about it. I know personally it was one of the only films I actually saw in theaters that year. Same for a lot of people. So there's just not all that much you can take away from it aside from pointing out the obvious and calling it dumb. Which of course it is, but who cares? It works. It has that special Fast and Furious magic. And hey, it did good enough for a sequel. A sequel that, if you can believe it, actually makes this one seem restrained by comparison. Who would have thought? So, here's a question for you. You're a studio executive in charge of a relatively small cinematic universe that really only exists to get one single movie made. There's, of course, some other stops along the way, but that's really the only long-term goal you had. And guess what? Surprise, surprise, you actually made it, and despite the fact that it came out during a global pandemic, it did pretty well. Against all odds, it worked. Even worked well enough to greenlight a sequel, which is great, but the question is, now that you've done the one thing the franchise was created for, what do you do now? How do you possibly up the ante and make a sequel to a movie as insane as Godzilla vs. Kong? Well, apparently, the answer is is you do the same thing again, but somehow make it even more dumberer. A thing that I did not think was possible for a film following something as stupid as Godzilla vs. Kong, but somehow now exists.
Is that a mini Kong?
And I'm not just talking about the plot here, it's everything. Every possible aspect of this movie, even aspects that were played straight in Godzilla vs. Kong, have now just completely gone off the wagon. Even the title has gone nuts. You replace the verses with an X, which, at least for me, makes me think of Godzilla and Kong being a couple now, which not sure how that would work. One could also interpret the X as like a multiplication of the two heroes, like maybe they morph together in the movie to create a Power Rangers Megazord type deal. I guess that would be cool. And if that wasn't confusing enough, they follow it with : the new empire, which after seeing the movie makes even less sense.
Your new empire?
So together, they form this truly disgusting title that is reminiscent of Batman v Superman : Dawn of Justice, but at least that one like mostly makes sense. I mean, it's stupid, but you get it. This though, this is just pure nonsense. Spoiler, the monkey and the lizard do not in fact multiply or date, and most certainly do not create some kind of new empire. But I'll tell you a few things that do happen. Kong goes to the dentist, Kong gets a power gauntlet, Kong gets a Diddy Kong-esque sidekick called Mini Kong. Kong then uses Mini Kong as a nunchuck to fight other giant apes, who apparently are just all over the fucking place in an area the movie literally calls with a location card, Subterranean Realm - Unmapped Region. Whatever the fuck that means, it's apparently a lava realm where there is some kind of ape caste system. An evil giant ape uses a bandolier/whip as a weapon, and also apparently is able to control a quadrupedal ice Godzilla with a crystal on the end of his bandolier/whip. Also, of course, rides it like a horse. There's apparently an entire tribe of humans who live in the Hollow Earth and also can control gravity. Godzilla is pink now and takes 2 separate naps in the Colosseum, like the Colosseum. Guess that's his new home now. Kong rides Godzilla. Oh yeah, Mothra somehow comes back, even though I'm pretty sure she got pretty hard in King of the Monsters, but whatever. And craziest of all, Rebecca Hall comes back to this movie and gets a haircut. I mean, they basically distilled the story down to a point where the human characters are essentially obsolete. Like, they just do not need to be there at all.
I had to call in some serious favors for my Discord chat.
It might as well just be a fully CGI film with no dialogue. You don't even need any exposition at this point. The lore of the franchise has already gone so far off the rails that things like the Hollow Earth are just a normal part of it now, which does make it fun to imagine someone who has never seen any of these movies wandering into this one, and the very first image of the film you see is King Kong running around in what appears to be an alien planet, and a location card comes up and says, "Somewhere in Hollow Earth." It just hits you right out of the fucking gate with the insanity and does not relent. And honestly, I don't really have much else to say about this one aside from that. It's just pure slop. Doesn't mean it's a terrible movie. I mean, it's not very good, but what it is a movie that completely microwaves your brain as you watch it and leaves less than 0 lasting impact. There's just not much you can say about a movie like that. Like, I saw this fairly recently and I cannot remember anything about it aside from all the stupid shit I listed off, which in a way I guess is the movie leaving an impact, but it's just because of how insane it all is. So I guess you could argue it does work, but regardless, I will always remember until my final moments that time when Kong used a small Kong as a nunchuck to beat up a medium-sized Kong. It's not a thing I ever thought I would see, and now that I have, I don't really know how to process it.
Is that a mini Kong?
But what can be taken away from all this, though? Is it a sad tale of a franchise devolving to a point where it's unrecognizable from where it started to where it is now? Or is it simply a case of a franchise experimenting and trying stuff out and eventually landing in a place that works for what it is? Well, if you ask me, it's a bit of both. When I saw Godzilla -1 in the theater last year, I was totally blown away. It was such a far cry from the MonsterVerse films that it kind of made me sad that the MonsterVerse never did anything like that. But then I realized that they actually tried with Godzilla 2014, and everyone hated it. And when I realized that, I got even more sad because it made me think how far this franchise has fallen. It ended up killing any hype I had for the new movie because it just seemed so empty by comparison, which, you know, it is, but as I've gone back and rewatched all these movies in preparation for this video, I've also come to a new conclusion that while it is of course a bit of a shame that the franchise didn't even attempt to maintain a serious tone, the silly unserious tone that they did end up shifting to probably ended up saving the franchise from the doom so many of these other cinematic universe projects end up succumbing to. You look at things like the SSU and the DCEU, and an issue that is always there, among many other things, is a complete lack of awareness of what the IP they have is and how to handle it. The tone is always fucked and seems driven by what they see other franchises do rather than what would be best for the IP or IPs they have. And as much as I can lay praise at the feet of something like Godzilla 2014 for going in the direction it did, there's no denying that many of its issues stem from that serious tone. A tone it wasn't able to pull off fully like Godzilla -1 did, and even if it could, a franchise built off movies like that wouldn't exactly lend itself well to, you know, being a franchise. Movies like those aren't really about the monsters, they're not about Godzilla, they're just dramas that take place in a movie that happens to have a giant monster in them, which is wonderful, but we should by no means degrade movies like those by turning them into franchises. Save that for dumb shit like the MonsterVerse. The reality is, the Godzilla King Kong IP, at least in America, and at least right now, can really only be done the way of Godzilla vs. Kong. Sure, it's stupid. No one is ever going to deny that. But how bad is it really to have a lowbrow, dumb action franchise that actually knows it's a lowbrow, dumb action franchise? There's some real value in that, especially in an era where so many of the staple franchises are so up their own ass. So I, for one, am just going to enjoy the stupid while it's here, because with how often these IPs go under these days, who knows how long it will last.
So hot.